All right, everyone, please come on in. Take your seats in the same groups as yesterday. Same groups as yesterday, everyone. Please take your seats. Excellent, excellent. Welcome back to 11th grade U.S. History 1877 to present. We are continuing our module on the Civil Rights Movement. And we are also working on building our backgrounds. We're going to do that today, just like yesterday. And we're using the same strategy, practical topics. Yesterday's was justice and injustice. Today's practical topic, direct action. Definition is right there. Non-violent resistance to injustice. Let's break that down. Start with violence. What is violence? I think most of you have a good concept of that. Chase? Yes, fights are violent. So non, meaning not, would be peaceable. Non-violent, more peaceful. Resistance is pushing back or trying to prevent injustice. And again, great job yesterday, everyone. We defined justice, and what did we find out? Marshall. Justice means different things to different people. Yes, great group work. We discussed what could make a law unjust, and we gave examples of an injustice. And then you all said why it was an injustice. Great group work, and we're going to continue that today. In fact, our objective, the content objective, we're going to discuss various forms of direct action by oral presentation and by placing the events on our class timeline. Our language objective today, recognizing leaders, places, and methods of the civil rights movement by finding action verbs and nouns in your primary and secondary sources. Make that proper nouns. That's the important key. Proper nouns in your primary and secondary sources. And those are right there in the packets on your desks. You have newspapers, you have photos, you have letters. And then your secondary sources are going to be a brief summary of the events that you are looking at. Now, what are these events? Well, they are forms of direct action, and we're going to quick go over some of those forms of direct action. But before we do that, a brief review. The First Amendment. What is the First Amendment to the Constitution? What are some elements of it? Ryder. Yes, free speech. What's another one? Sky. Freedom of religion. Correct. We also have freedom of the press. And the last one that is relevant to us today, the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Forms of direct action. Does anyone recognize this? Rocky. It is the Million Man March. Yes, marches are very visible. They show unity. They show a problem is widespread. Now, we are not going to be covering any marches today. We're actually going to be talking about the Million Man March later this week. We are going to be covering a boycott today. Group 1, you have a boycott. A boycott puts financial pressure on a government or business until the needs of those boycotting are met. Walkouts, we'll put that in context of you students. You have to be here. Yes, Chase, you do have to be at school. Now, group 5, you are studying the East LA Chicano blowouts. What does that mean? Well, these students, their needs weren't being met. They broke the law and refused to go to school until their needs were met. Sit-ins, they're as visible as walkouts, but they're kind of the opposite. You refuse to leave until your needs are met. Strikes. In the context of unions, that's usually where you'll find strikes. Employee needs, worker needs, are not being met, so they refuse to work until the employer, the boss, meets those needs. And there are a few others. There's some pictures of other kinds of direct action, but we are more focused on the ones mentioned this week. So why use nonviolent direct action in the first place? It grabs attention. You all have newspaper articles. Media gets a hold of it. It's great. Now what happens when the media gets a hold of it? I need you to pay attention to those newspaper articles to see how those protesters are treated. You'll find that they are treated very violently in most cases. So you'll see a contrast between the peaceable protest and the violent reaction. Again, I want you to pay attention to that today. Now, the protest adds pressure. The direct action adds pressure to businesses and governments to act. And finally, words are very powerful. Group 3, I believe Group 3, you are going to be looking at the arrest of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that led to his writing of Letter from Birmingham Jail. We are going to be analyzing that letter later this week. And one very important factor that I put up there, let me get out of the way. The brain registers physical and emotional pain in the same way. So words are powerful. All right, your groups. Group 1, you are going to be doing the Birmingham bus boycott of 1955. Group 2, Greensboro sit-ins, 1960. Group 3, as I just said, the arrest of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that occurred in 1963. Group 4, you are going to be working on the Delano Grape Strike, 1968. And as mentioned, Group 5, you have the East LA Chicano blowouts from 1968. And one of the things I also want you to notice is that 1968 had a lot going on, but we'll get more into that as we build towards it. So here is where the groups would break out, and about 15-20 minutes they would study their respective element, and then they present to the class. And this can be done a couple ways. It could be done jigsaw. You could have that, you could have that specialist, and each one goes to expert, and each one goes to a different area. It can be done in a bunch of different ways. The rationale is that you're building a base with practical topics. You make those specific aspects easier to grasp, and you're gradually working your way up Bloom's taxonomy. For example, practical topics, kind of along the lower elements, understanding in this case. And as a teacher, you can recognize where that scaffolding is needed. For example, if they're struggling with the early concepts, you can build that scaffolding early and work your way up. So it's a great gauge. And the fundamental knowledge of practical topics are something that all students need. And it's applicable to all grade levels and all subjects. As you can see, it allows group work. That's one of the applications. There's some flexibility within the curriculum for practical topics. If you know the EL's personal experiences, you can incorporate them. Certainly civil rights is a topic that you can use EL funds of knowledge and cultural capital for, because it's relevant around the world. And it does also work within standardized tests. Texas, as we know, has some very strict TEKS, especially with history. So practical topics you can cut up and pinpoint and hit those TEKS as you're teaching them. And as mentioned, it's great for all age levels, and it really is incorporated to all topics because everyone needs that base knowledge to build on, and then you can start analyzing. So thank you very much for my presentation. for listening to my presentation, and have a great day. We'll see you in class.